From the Oklahoman newsroom, you are watching the Orange Alert. I'm Jenny Carlson here with part of our OSU coverage team, columnist Barry Trammell and OSU beat writer Scott Wright. Guys, the Cowboys get ready for Big 12 play. It's finally here. TCU comes to OSU on Saturday afternoon, 2:30 start. And frankly, guys, this may be the game of the week in the country just from a ranking standpoint. You've got number 6 OSU, number 16 TCU. And Scott, I think the first spot we need to start is the OSU defense, because through 3 games, not really tested. We know those first 2 games against, non-Power 5 teams, that wasn't going to happen. But against Pitt's not really like a Big 12 team. And TCU, they've got receivers and they've got a seemingly more confident Kenny Hill. What's the test in your mind for this defense this week? Well,
it's really 2 big tests, and that's what's going to make this so difficult. You've got an offense that can throw the ball deep better than what we've seen so far. You look at the quarterbacks that Oklahoma State has faced, and honestly, Ben DiNucci, who came in and replaced Max Brown last week at Pitt, might end up being the best of the bunch that they've faced through these first 3 games. Now you've got Kenny Hill coming in, completing 75% of his passes. He's got some guys who can get open deep, so it's going to test those cornerbacks in a way that they haven't been tested before. These are 2 young guys with 3 starts under their belt each, and they're going to be pushed. They've had moments when guys have gotten behind them, but quarterbacks haven't been able to hit those open men. So that's going to be the number 1 big test. Number 2, as we saw with Tulsa, there were some issues with quarterbacks being able to get out of the pocket, gain some yardage, particularly Chad President. Run for some first downs in some 3rd and long situations that really hurt that defensive plan that day. And TCU has the capability to do that as well with Kenny Hill. He's a mobile guy who can get outside and do some damage. So you've got 2 big tests that these guys are going to have to face on Saturday, and it's going to come down to needing all 11 guys to help contain those 2 issues.
Before we talk more specifically about OSU, we were watching some film there of last year, OSU, TCU, and Barry. Kenny Hill was getting clobbered quite a bit, but he was more a runner, almost strictly a runner at that point in the year last year. They weren't throwing it much at all. What have you seen out of Kenny Hill? Does he look like a bit of a different guy in your mind?
Well, a little bit. I'm still not sold on Kenny Hill. He's SMU and Jackson State are 2 of their 3 opponents. Now, they got the nice win at Arkansas, but it's not like the Frog offense went up and down the field on the Razorbacks. So Kenny Hill's been a big disappointment. He was given the job at A&M, got off to a great start, and then just sort of flamed out. Transferred to TCU, got the job, didn't really produce. So he's a little bit of on his last chance here. I think he's probably better. But I think by the time you're a 5th-year senior type of guy, you're sort of who you are. So I don't know that Kenny Hill can beat Oklahoma State by himself or the TCU offense. I think OSU defense is going to do well enough to win this game. Comes down to the OSU offense against the TCU defense.
Scott, let's talk a bit about some of these parts of the OSU defense, because maybe Kenny Hill isn't sort of this evolved quarterback, but let's say he's, a much better passer, twice as good or something than he was a year ago. Looking at this Cowboys secondary, what's been your impression thus far? I know it's a small sample size against teams that aren't Big 12 offense worthy, but what have you seen out of the secondary to this point, and especially those young quarterbacks, Rodarius Williams and A.J. Green at the corners?
As a whole, I would put. I think that Trey Flowers is really solid at safety in coverage. Ramon Richards, when asked to cover, is really good as well. His issues come in tackling in space, that he's having to learn how to attack that differently from the safety position. Now, at the cornerback positions, I would give them, if I'm going to throw a grade on it, I would say in the B range. I think that they've been really solid most of the time. Like I said, they've had times when a guy has gotten a step on them and quarterback hasn't been able to hit them. A couple of those passes get completed, and maybe we're talking a little bit differently about these guys. But for the most part, they've been in position. They've had their chances for some interceptions. Had one taken away because of a penalty. So you're going to see them break through and get their hands on some passes. I think the question will be, are they going to not get fooled by double moves? Are they going to be able to stick with guys that try to fly down the sidelines with them? And that's going to be the big question that we haven't seen a lot of. The big thing is they haven't been tested a lot. There haven't been a lot of guys going at them yet, and so I think we're going to see that more and more over the next couple of weeks.
Barry, have you had any red flags go up in your mind as you've watched this secondary play? Or is there just not enough to even, say yay or nay to what you've seen out there?
Well, probably the latter. I mean, I've been encouraged by the play of these guys, but they haven't played a typical Big 12 offense. Tulsa's a little rebuilding, still pretty good on offense, but sort of rebuilding. Pitt was not all that proficient in South Alabama. So I think the test is to come. I do think those young corners will be tested well by TCU. I just think I like what's happening with the line, because I think Glenn Spencer is able to give those corners a lot of help. He's not putting them on an island. He's giving them a lot of coverage help and taken away from stuff up on the line of scrimmage, and the defensive line has proved to be very solid and looks like another good unit. They missed Vincent Taylor, but Osborne has come along and turned into a budding star himself. So I think they're supplementing what they have to do on the back end with strong play on the front, and if that continues, then I think they're going to be okay on defense.
Against Pitt, Scott, let's talk about that defensive line, because against Pitt, OSU's running at a deficit at linebacker because of injuries and Calvin Bundage's suspension, and that defensive line really had to take some steps to help there. Now, can they help these cornerbacks getting some pressure, maybe, really kind of pushing Kenny Hill or other Big 12 quarterbacks? What's your feeling about this defensive line's ability to continue to help the guys who are ultimately behind them?
It's really interesting looking at the stats. There's only one defensive end out of the 5 that they play that actually has a sack so far, which stats can kind of skew things one way or the other. More of their sacks have come from guys up the middle like DeQuinton Osborne. But I think that these guys are very capable of getting pressure and getting to Kenny Hill when they need to. The issue will be more of him taking off whenever the cornerbacks or the secondary is in good coverage. So I think that they can really provide a lot of assistance in that way, because I think they've got some speed guys, they've got some strength, they've got a good mix of those 9 guys that they're using on that defensive line that they're rotating through. They're keeping those guys fresh, and they're being able to get some pressure and collapse some pockets on some quarterbacks. I think that's going to be a key factor with Kenny Hill, and I think that they can help out the secondary by getting some pressure and making Kenny Hill move around or do some other things.
Barry, this defensive line feels a little bit like the OSU receiver core, and it's sort of various pieces, and you can put this guy in if it's a passing down, this guy in if it's a running play. I mean, it really feels like they've built some flexibility there. Joe Bob Clements, you mentioned Glenn Spencer before, really got a group that they can sort of mix and match pieces out there if they need to.
They got a lot of parts, and that's what you need. You don't want to, when coaches talk about depth, this is what they're talking about. You mentioned the linebackers. I mean, they go to Pitt, very short, but played a bunch of guys you weren't sure about, and they played well, and that shows that the depth. And last year was a big defensive line depth was a big story at Stillwater. First time ever, or maybe in 30 years, that they really had solid depth on the D line, and that proved to be accurate. And now, that depth hasn't all gone away. They've got even more young guys coming up that can play. Scotty mentioned 5 ends, and at least one of those guys can move inside if you need to. So they got a lot of flexibility. They don't have, they don't have Reggie White on that line. They don't have Alan Page.
They don't even have Vincent Taylor on that line right now.
But they do have, but they do have a lot of guys that can contribute and a lot of guys that can play well. And they do have a budding, like we mentioned, in DeQuinton Osborne. This is a guy that can really play, and he's been a playmaker so far. And if he continues that, then that defensive line becomes an ultra strength of this team.
Best defensive lineman right now, Scott. Who are you picking?
It's it changes for me week to week. I can't make up my mind, because for about a week and a half I was convinced that it was DeQuinton Osborne. After watching tape from Pitt and talking to Glenn Spencer, I'm leaning toward Jordan Brailford right now, because this guy really is. He's making plays in the backfield. He's making plays 20 and 30 yards down the field, chasing guys down. You know, on the long screen pass that Pitt had that ended up setting up one of their touchdowns, Adrian Baker was the guy who actually came across and made the tackle. And you had Malik Kearse coming in from, he was the guy that got beat on the play, actually chasing his guy down. The next guy in line was Jordan Brelford. This guy is really fast and never stops. And so, though this week, ask me next week, it might change my mind. But this week, I'm going with Jordan Brelford.
Barry, you sounded convinced that you think DeQuinton Osborne's the guy that may be that best defensive lineman for the Cowboys.
Yes, and I tend to give extra credit to defensive tackles because they're so much easier to, or so much more difficult to find than defensive ends. But this is a guy that he's just making plays. He's in the backfield, disrupting running games, rushing the passer, doing all kinds of things. If you got a guy like that on the interior, that just makes things easier everywhere. More, you know, they got a double team. The guards have to come over. The center opens up holes elsewhere. So he's been a pleasant surprise. Maybe they knew he was going to be good. I don't know. I did not know he was going to be this good, but he's been excellent through 3 games.
I wrote about him a couple weeks ago, guys, and I talked to him after the South Alabama game. And the thing I was most shocked by was his size, in that he's not that big. Yep. He's sort of in the James Washington category, that when he walks in the room and you're expecting to see James Washington, you go, oh, well, he's not as tall as I thought. But then he puts on the uniform and he gets out on the field and he starts playing and he looks like he's 6'7". DeQuinton Osborne feels like he's in that 6'3"-ish. He's listed at 6 foot, but there's no way he's over about 5'10", which makes it even more impressive that he's able to get out there and go. I think that motor is a big reason why he's been as effective as he has been.
And not only that, he's really quick. And he can explode up and get underneath guys because of his leverage, really, and low pad level that coaches love to talk about, which is just really sounds like another term for being short. But but he gets under guys' pads and can hit them quicker than they can get their long reach out and get to him, and he really uses that to his advantage well.
Yeah, and I don't know if they thought that he was going to be quite this good, but I know that Glenn Spencer loved that motor, that go, that quickness. I know those were all things he liked when they got him out of junior college. All right, guys, let's turn our Orange Alert attention to the offense. And in similar ways that the OSU defense wasn't facing, great offenses, we haven't really seen Pitt to some degree has a defense that, can do some things against OSU, but they're not built to defend these pass offenses. Now we see TCU's defense. Scott, how good is this TCU defense, and what can we expect it to try to do to try to slow down what we've seen OSU do offensively?
As far as how good they are, they look solid, but we really don't know because they haven't faced a Big 12 offense either. They played Arkansas. They held them to 7, which was a pretty solid number. But they've played Jacksonville State and SMU. SMU is very similar in some schemes to what Oklahoma State does. They scored 36 points and were able to actually take the lead and had control of that game for a while. So there are some questions there. TCU is obviously designed to play in the Big 12, so it is a different approach. But you've still got so many weapons on this Oklahoma State offense that you've got to figure out a way to take away. And Gary Patterson, being an old school coach, he likes to take away the run. So you're not probably going to see him do a lot of things to change up his secondary. He's going to want to be a guy that stops the run first, and that's going to be a big challenge for Mason Rudolph and the receivers, is to make sure that that they're hitting their open men and forcing that defense to back up a little bit.
Yeah, Barry, Scott mentions Gary Patterson. I mean, a guy that has really built the TCU program around that defensive mentality. He's still the defensive play caller during games. I think Mike Gundy said earlier this week he expects that Gary Patterson's probably staying up all hours trying to figure something out. What do you expect? You've seen a lot of Gary Patterson. We all have over the years. What do you expect, though, him to try to do defensively on Saturday against this OSU offense?
Oh, my best guess is that Gary Patterson will try to stop that deep ball game, play the safeties back over the top and dare OSU to do things down under. I think that opens the running lanes for Justice Hill. About the second time Justice Hill has a nice game, Gary Patterson's going to say, hey, forget that, safeties, you get up and we're going to not let anybody run on us. Then Mason Rudolph can throw over the top. That's my best guess. Gary Patterson has a lot of pride. and he believes that his defense can thrive even in this pass-happy Big 12, and sometimes it has. To his credit, he's an outstanding defensive coach. But he's in a tough spot with this Oklahoma State offense, which seems to be able to work on all cylinders.
Yeah, and I think too, Scotty, about the fact that, Barry mentions Justice Hill finding a running lane, but Justice Hill catching the ball out of the backfield. That's something we've started to see some hints of, but that's just another thing when you start talking about, those shorter passes and what they can do in that intermediate game. That opens up a whole other can of worms if you're a defense.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and Justice has shown that he can catch the ball. It was one of those things that we didn't really know. He caught 5 passes in his breakout freshman year. We didn't know what kind of a receiver he was really going to be, but he's shown that he can get out and run some pass patterns that look like receiver patterns. He can get into an open space in a screen pass and find some running room. And so he's proven that he can be an effective pass catcher in this offense. And a lot of their running back passing game looks a lot like run before at the start, the way that the linemen block, the way that the play is set up. So it's a tough thing to defend, and he's capable of it. Rudolph is capable of getting him the ball in good situations. So I think that can be a really big weapon if the underneath starts to open up. Jalen McCleskey was claiming anything on the underneath or across the middle at Pitt on Saturday. Yeah. So Justice Hill didn't get a lot of chances, but if he's needed in that way, he's shown that he's very capable of doing it.
Guys, there's a lot of talk about OSU and their offense being the best in the Big 12. I think if they continue on this pace, and if we see them pick apart TCU. Barry, as you said, Gary Patterson, very prideful, wants to have a great defense. If these guys do what they've been doing the last 3 weeks against a TCU defense, to me, that starts to elevate them, not just among great offenses in the league, but you got to start talking nationally about what this offense can do, Barry. This is prolific type of stuff we could potentially be saying.
Well, I think Oklahoma State is in the running for the nation's best offense. You can put a few others in there, but when you look around, Alabama's offense is not necessarily what its bell cow. Florida State's lost its quarterback. Clemson has the great defense. Southern Cal has struggled more than maybe we thought they would. When you look at it, the 2 most impressive offenses going are here in the state of Oklahoma. So if the Cowboys keep this up, yeah, they're going to have one of the nation's best offense, and they're going to have a quarterback that spends all season in the Heisman Trophy discussion.
Feels like you reading my notes here, because the last thing I want to talk about here is a great segue to Mason Rudolph. As we've talked about the offense, we talk about all these weapons, and we just kind of mentioned Rudolph in passing, but guys, he's emerged as a Heisman contender, and I think NFL-wise, the talk is out there. Scott, what are you hearing about just the way that NFL folks are looking at Mason Rudolph right now?
Well, it was interesting. There was a story that came out from Sports Illustrated's Monday Morning Quarterback earlier this week saying that Mason Rudolph has an NFL draft problem, and it's that the perception that he's a system quarterback and he doesn't have the top-level arm strength to play at the next level. He doesn't. He doesn't have the accuracy to fit in the tight windows that you have to at the next level. So there are these questions out there about him. Personally, when I look at him, I see a guy that's definitely got the body to play at the next level. I see a guy that can make just about every throw that is needed, and I see a guy who is ultra competitive, ultra committed to being a better quarterback, to understanding a defense, to getting in the film room, and he's a self-admitted film junkie, and he watches as much as possible. He understands defenses in a way that I think a lot of quarterbacks don't, and I think that those are the things, the mental edge, along with the physical tools, are going to make him a guy that can play at the next level. And let's be honest. I mean, when you're talking about NFL quarterbacks, there's a handful of really, really good ones, and after that, it's kind of a mix and match. Not every draft has the next Peyton Manning in it, and I think that there's no reason that Mason Rudolph can't go and be a Matthew Stafford type guy that is a serviceable, solid quarterback at the next level.
If he's a Matthew Stafford guy, Hey, give me a call. Mason, let's become better friends. For crying out loud. You see the contract Matthew Stafford just got? Man.
But I think that speaks to the fact that there aren't a ton of that uber fantastic quarterbacks.
Right.
But I mean, Matthew Stafford has shown he can stay healthy. He can win ball games. He can, be a very good quarterback in the NFL. And Barry, I think it's an interesting question because Mason Rudolph has had a couple of clunker type games. I mean, Bedlam last year springs to my mind. Some times when maybe conditions weren't pristine, and that has maybe sort of brought some questions into, what can he do as an NFL quarterback. But a week ago, you guys are in Pittsburgh, home of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's looking like Ben Roethlisberger out there, Barry. You wrote about that.
Yeah, he's bouncing off defensive linemen. They're grabbing him. They can't. He spins away. They can't get their hands on him, and he delivers a couple of big plays just by standing tall. If he can do that, then he can survive. Now, running away from the Pitt Panthers is different from running away from the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the NFL, generally, when the guys get you, you're got, and down you go. But that's what makes Big Ben so different and special. And if Mason can continue that, that increases his draft stock and his draft potential. If he can show a propensity to not go down easy.
Yeah. Well, let's see what they do on Saturday against TCU, folks. Again, kickoff 2:30 in the afternoon up in Stillwater. That game on ESPN. And be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.